Hundreds of thousands of rail workers stand on the brink of a nationwide strike that would paralyze the U.S. supply chain and passenger rail service ahead of the busy holiday season. "Let me be clear, a rail shutdown would devastate our economy," President Joe Biden said on Monday. "Without freight rail, many U.S. industries would shut down." Biden asked Congress to pass a law that imposes the terms of a tentative agreement reached in September but was rejected by several unions. The fate of a potential deal between rail workers and companies remains uncertain, especially if Congress fails to impose the tentative agreement. 4 of 12 unions have already voted down the agreement, and those 4 unions represent the majority of unionized rail workers. A nationwide strike is expected unless the contract is ratified by each of the 12 rail unions, since all of the unions have vowed not to cross the picket line in the event of a work stoppage. Unions have said rail employees are seeking improvements to working conditions, since workers do not receive paid sick days. The unions have accused rail companies of penalizing workers for taking time off for medical reasons and holding the nation's economy hostage to ensure a favorable deal. The National Carriers Conference Committee, or NCCC, which represents the nation's freight railroads in national collective bargaining, has said rail employees are provided significant time off, and the companies have offered a fair contract that includes a considerable wage increase. Here's a timeline of how the U.S. arrived at the precipice of a rail shutdown and what to expect as a deadline nears in the coming weeks. July 15 – As rail unions and companies struggle to reach an agreement on the terms of a new contract, Biden signs an executive order that creates a presidential emergency board. The board's goal is to issue guideline recommendations for an agreement between the two sides in order to avert a potentially devastating rail strike. August 16 – The Presidential Emergency Board issues recommendations for a compromise agreement between the unions and rail companies. The recommendations include a 24% raise from 2020 to 2024 and bonus increases. The union's demand for a new time-off policy, however, is omitted. September 14 – Rail workers and companies prepare for a potential strike that could cost $2 billion a day in lost economic output, according to the Association of American Railroads, which lobbies on behalf of rail companies. Freight railroads are responsible for carrying 40% of the nation's long-haul freight, and a work stoppage could jeopardize these shipments. September 15 – Rail companies and unions reach a tentative labor agreement after 20 consecutive hours of negotiations brokered by U.S. Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh. The tentative agreement balances the needs of workers, businesses, and our nation's economy, Walsh said. The agreement improves the time-off policies at the rail companies, which are a key sticking point in the negotiations, according to a statement from the two largest unions, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers Trainmen, or BLET, and the Smart Transportation Division, or SMART-TD. October 11 – A union representing about 12,000 rail workers votes down the tentative contract that was brokered by the White House, raising the possibility of an eventual strike. The Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the Teamsters, or BMWED, rejects the tentative contract due to frustration with compensation and working conditions, particularly a lack of paid sick days, BMWED President Tony Cardell says in a statement. Railroaders do not feel valued, Cardell says. They resent the fact that management holds no regard for their quality of life. The National Carriers Conference Committee, or NCCC, the group representing the freight railroad companies, expresses disappointment in the decision to reject the contract. October 27 – A second union rejects the White House brokered deal, elevating the likelihood of a nationwide strike. The vote by the Brotherhood of Railroad Sign-Alman, a union representing 6,000 workers, centers on the lack of paid sick days, according to a statement from Brotherhood of Railroad Sign-Alman President Michael Baldwin. The NCCC expresses disappointment over the union vote. The tentative contract included the largest wage package in nearly 5 decades, maintained rail employees' platinum-level health benefits, and added an additional day of paid time off, the NCCC says in a statement. November 21 – The nation's largest rail union votes down the tentative contract brokered by the White House, dramatically escalating the likelihood of a strike. SMART-TD, which represents about 28,000 conductors, narrowly rejects the contract in a vote that garnered record turnout, the union says. The second largest rail union, made up of engineers, votes in favor of the contract, splitting the top rail unions. November 28, Joe Biden asks Congress to intervene and avert a potential strike by forcing the workers' unions to accept a White House brokered deal as a December deadline approaches. In a statement, Biden touts himself as a pro-labor president but says the larger economic implications outweigh those concerns. I am reluctant to override the ratification procedures and the views of those who voted against the agreement. But in this case where the economic impact of a shutdown would hurt millions of other working people and families, I believe Congress must use its powers to adopt this deal, he says. He calls on Congress to quickly pass legislation to adopt the White House brokered deal reached in September. Outgoing Speaker Nancy Pelosi later says in a statement that the House will soon take up such legislation and will not modify the agreed-upon terms. November 29, Joe Biden tells ABC News he's confident the U.S. will avert a rail strike. Congress, I think, has to act to prevent it, he says. It's not an easy call, but I think we have to do it. Republican congressional leaders Representative Kevin McCarthy, R. California, and Senator Mitch McConnell, RKY, say they think a measure imposing the tentative agreement will pass. Democratic congressional leaders have not gone as far, saying only that they'd bring the measure before the House and Senate. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says Biden is confident a rail strike will be avoided. Joe's confident we're going to get to a resolution on this, Jean-Pierre says. December 4, by the end of the week that concludes on December 4, House lawmakers are expected to take up a bill that adopts the tentative agreement brokered by the White House. If passed, the bill will be sent to the Senate, where it faces uncertain prospects as the chamber is split 50-50 between the parties. Most legislation requires 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. December 9, a strike deadline looms on December 9, when unions could move forward with a coordinated work stoppage. Additional reporting contributed by Morgan Windsor, Sam Sweeney, Sarah Kalinowski, Amanda Mail, Zunaira Zaki, Trish Turner, Ahmed Hemingway and William Kim.